What was the first sign of human civilization? Some of you might say tools made of stone. Others, written language like the cuneiform tablets etched in clay. And agriculture definitely makes sense. Well, when anthropologist Margaret Mead was asked this question, she gave a very different answer. A human bone. Once broken, now healed. You know what? At first your answer sounds a bit strange, but you see, in the wild, animals with a broken leg cannot run. They cannot hunt. And when they cannot keep up with the rest of the group, they become prey. The same would have been true for our early human ancestors, and so this healed human femur was a sign of something much greater. It meant that somewhere during their long nomadic treks in which our early ancestors were at the disposal at the numerous terrors and horrors of nature, despite this logical tendency towards the survival of the fittest in this dog-eat-dog world, one person stopped to help another. It meant that someone made sure that this injured person was fed. It meant that someone protected this injured person long enough for their bones to mend. And from those small acts, could be costly, could be inconvenient, we have the first signs of civilization as we know it. I was 17 when I first heard this anecdote offhandedly. At the time, I was living with a classmate after finding myself unhoused. All at once, the world felt a lot scarier and a lot colder. But what I remember most out of that time wasn't fear, it was the people who helped. It was classmates who made space for me at their dinner tables and friends who made sure I made it to school. They were teachers and mentors who checked in on me when they didn't have to. You see, we don't know if Mead actually said this anecdote, but something about it caught on. There's this feel-good feeling that comes from it, one that makes sense of what doesn't. Because when we all stop to think about it, I'm sure we all have those moments, our own version of a healed femur. Moments when someone stopped and helped us. Moments when someone made sure that we weren't alone. And so I wish this was a little easier to transfer to our modern society today. Well, although we live in a world more connected than any generation before us, able to reach anyone and anyone from anywhere, studies show that rates of social isolation and loneliness are on the rise. In fact, in 2025, the Pew Research Center published a study that reported that 16% of Americans reported feeling isolated from each other all or most of the time, reporting an intense feeling of loneliness. The World Health Organization reported that this rate was almost double in low-income countries, with consequences that prove concerning. Persistent feelings of loneliness can increase the rate of premature death by 26%. Total social isolation can increase the risk of heart disease by 29%, strokes by 32%. They're tied to higher levels of stress, depression, even dementia. But these consequences don't just stop at the individual level, they ripple outwards. In a 2023 report by then Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy, he reported that since 1972, Americans' faith and trust in each other have declined steadily, with recent statistics showing that only 34% of Americans trust each other. At the same time, rates of political polarization are at near historic highs. But when you look closer, there's something quieter, but just as powerful. A shared set of anxieties, a shared set of concerns. Because when you look at it much closer, we see that people are worried about many of the same things. Another Pew study published in 2025 reported that 57% of Americans reported feeling worried about the affordability of healthcare. 62% were concerned about rising costs and inflation. about the amount of people living in poverty. These aren't just partisan concerns, they're human ones. They're about whether or not a family can afford to see a doctor. They're about whether or not groceries can stretch till the end of the week. They're about whether our children will have the same set of opportunities than there were before. And so there's these waves of underlying fears and underlying hopes that unite us all. But still, division is so pronounced. And taken together, these trends can be overwhelming, disorienting, disappointing, depressing, whatever. Then we return to Mead's anecdote. What does it ask of us now? How do we cultivate belonging in times like these? How do we reach out for one another in compassion when our divisions feel so pronounced? Recently, I was appointed as a commissioner to New York City Civic Engagement Commission, an agency that oversees the People's Money Initiative, which brings together New Yorkers from all 5 boroughs to decide and address the issues that most impact their communities. Since its inception in 2022, the People's Money has funded a wide variety of programs, from youth development, mental health initiatives, food security efforts, among many others. I can see that this isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. In order for programs to work, they have to have funding. They have to have infrastructure and the people willing to put the work in. But at its core, the principles are so simple, replicable. It looks like showing up, neighbors, listening, genuinely listening to what one another has to say despite their distinctions, coming together to imagine a future that's better for all of them. What matters is that these solutions are designed by the community members themselves, not just for them, but by them. The people closest to the issues are the ones naming them, discussing them, deciding how funding can be used. And this shared investment is powerful. It becomes the foundation in which belonging is built. The American Immigration Council's Belonging Barometer reports that a greater sense of belonging is tied to better health, greater life satisfaction, and decreased levels of stress and loneliness. But we see that people are coming together. And belonging isn't built in just theory, but the simple choices that we make. It can look like organizing an annual food drive, volunteering at a local shelter, checking in on an elderly neighbor during a heat wave, carrying extra food just in case someone might need it. And in those small, simple choices, we see something deeper take shape. Not just better programs, but better relationships. And so I'm not saying that community is the one solution to everything. The problems we face are complex, at times existential. But if we hope to meet them, it's going to be in the ways that we show up for one another. And so the compassion we offer is often the compassion that we come to rely on. And that means that the path to healthier societies is through connection. And yet something worries me about what this means and how easily this idea can become so controversial, so radical. Long ago, during a long journey, someone stopped to take care of one another in need. That act, small, costly, inconvenient, became the first signs of civilization as we know it. And it could very well be that the future of our societies will be shaped by this same decision. And so, when we see others struggling, when we see someone is hurting, when we see someone is in need of help, will we keep walking? Or will we stop? Because civilization didn't begin with a newfound invention, it began the moment someone refused to walk away. It began as it did 15,000 years ago with the simple decision to treat one another with compassion. And so if we want stronger, healthier societies, the work begins the same way it did back then, with the decision to reach out for one another, even when it is inconvenient, especially when it is inconvenient. And so, if I'm to leave you with anything, whenever you can, stop. Help someone heal. Thank you.